Awaken your spirit chosen ones. Some people don't break when life hits them. They break when life stops protecting them. What you're about to hear isn't motivational, and it's definitely not comfortable. It's the part of the story people skip because it exposes too much. When someone is labeled chosen, the assumption is favor, protection, ease. That's the lie. In reality, the chosen one usually gets the heaviest pressure, the least mercy, and the longest nights. Not because they're special in a flattering way, but because life keeps testing the same people it knows won't fully disappear. Here's a fact most people don't talk about. Psychologically, the human brain adapts faster to repeated stress than to repeated comfort. That's why the people who've been hit the hardest often develop sharper awareness, stronger emotional control, and an unsettling calm when things fall apart. It's not luck, it's conditioning. And when someone survives long enough under that kind of pressure, they don't come back softer, they come back different. Now add another layer. While life was tearing this person apart, someone else was watching, quietly, closely, sometimes cheering it on. They mistook endurance for weakness. They assumed pain would shrink this person, make them easier to manage, easier to dismiss, easier to step over. Big mistake. Pain doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it reorganizes. And here's the slightly funny part. If you have a sense of humor about human behavior, the same people who couldn't handle your strength are now overwhelmed by your recovery. They were comfortable when you were struggling, but your get back. That's where things start glitching for them. Suddenly they're confused, unsettled, and doing mental gymnastics they didn't stretch for. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about the awkward moment when life hands someone back a person they thought was finished, upgraded, aware, and no longer playing the role they depended on. Stay with this, because what comes next explains why your breakdown wasn't the end of the story. It was the setup. Number one, they thought your pain was proof you were finished. People love to believe that when someone falls apart, it's over for them. They see cracks and immediately assume collapse. They misread your struggle as weakness, your tears as surrender, your silence as defeat. But what they fail to understand is that life doesn't break the chosen one to finish them. It breaks them to forge them. Pain isn't a stop sign, it's a crucible. And not everyone has the patience or vision to see that. While they whispered behind closed doors, assuming you were defeated, you were quietly learning the most uncomfortable truths about yourself. Every sleepless night, every moment of despair, every instance where the world seemed too heavy wasn't proof that you were failing. It was proof that you were being tested in ways that would force growth no one else could manufacture. The people watching didn't notice because they weren't meant to. They were spectators in your trial, expecting the easy ending. But life doesn't give easy endings to those it's shaping for greatness. What makes this even more brutal for them is that while they were certain your story was ending, the groundwork for your comeback was already being laid. They couldn't see the internal resilience forming in you because it doesn't announce itself. It's silent, subtle, and often invisible to anyone who isn't willing to look beyond the surface. They only saw what they wanted to see: a broken person, a failure, someone who would stay small. The truth is that your pain never defined you. It refined you. And that's terrifying for people who thrived on the idea that you could be contained, underestimated, or overlooked. They didn't realize that every moment they counted you out, you were becoming someone they would struggle to recognize, someone whose strength would eventually make their assumptions look absurd. They thought your pain meant you were finished, but the harsh, uncomfortable reality is that pain doesn't end the chosen one. It prepares them to return stronger, wiser, and unshakably alive. Number two, your collapse exposed their dependence. When you were at your lowest, it wasn't just your world shaking, theirs was trembling too. People who had relied on you, knowingly or not, suddenly realized that the support they took for granted wasn't infinite. Your breakdown didn't just show your own vulnerability, it revealed the cracks in their lives, the parts they depended on you to hold together. They had grown comfortable with the idea that you would absorb the stress, carry the weight, and smooth over the chaos. And when you faltered, they felt that absence like a shockwave. They had assumed that your presence was a constant, a quiet safety net, the kind of thing they never had to think about because it was always there. But reality hit them hard. Without you, they were exposed. The illusion of stability they had leaned on was gone, and suddenly they had to face the fact that some of their strength was borrowed, not built. For many, that kind of realization is unbearable. It forces self-reflection, and most people would rather ignore their own flaws than confront them. Your collapse didn't just remove you from their daily convenience. It forced them into a space they weren't prepared to occupy. Responsibility for themselves, for decisions they had ignored, for the consequences they had conveniently avoided because you were handling it all. And the truth is, they weren't ready. The sudden emptiness, the moments where they had no one to step in and fix what you usually fixed, exposed how much of their life depended on you being strong, available, and willing to sacrifice without question. This exposure is uncomfortable because it shines a mirror they weren't expecting. Your weakness wasn't theirs to exploit, it was theirs to confront. And in that confrontation, they felt small, unprepared, and inadequate. They realized that your absence wasn't just about your suffering. It was a reflection of their reliance, their inability to function without the person they thought could never break. Your collapse revealed more than your struggle. It revealed the fragile scaffolding of their own lives, held together by the person they assumed would always be there. Number 3, they can't replicate the version of you they lost. When people watched you struggle, they assumed they were witnessing the end of something. Your energy, your spirit, your ability to stand tall. They expected that after everything you went through, you would return diminished, a softer, more manageable version of yourself. That assumption was their mistake, and the harsh reality hitting them now is that the person they thought they knew, the version of you they could predict and control, is gone. What comes back isn't familiar, and that terrifies them. They thrived on predictability. They liked knowing your limits, counting on your reactions, and shaping their world around the version of you who could be bent or broken without consequence. But pain, struggle, and adversity have a way of reconstructing a person in ways others can't imitate. Your comeback isn't just about recovery, it's about evolution. It's about emerging from the wreckage with clarity, with boundaries, and with an understanding of yourself that they can't buy, borrow, or force. Now, they are confronted with a version of you they didn't anticipate, stronger, sharper, and unwilling to fit the mold they once relied on. The traits they once dismissed or mocked have become your armor. The lessons they ignored are now your tools, and the confidence they underestimated is now a quiet but undeniable force that they can't control. They realize painfully that no matter what they do, they cannot pull back the clock and regain access to the person they thought they had. That impossibility is a kind of power. It's unsettling for them because control was their comfort, and familiarity was their weapon. Your transformation strips both away. They can no longer lean on assumptions, exploit weaknesses, or manipulate outcomes based on the past. What they're facing now is unpredictable, unstoppable, and uniquely yours. The person they lost isn't just returning, they are returning rewritten, and nothing they do can replicate that. For them, it's a quiet, uncomfortable truth. Some versions of people only happen once, and the world has no blueprint for how to handle it when it comes back stronger. Number 4, Your suffering forced them to confront their role. When you were breaking, it wasn't just your life under pressure. It was a spotlight on everyone who had been part of it. Your pain didn't exist in isolation. The people who were around, whether they realized it or not, were forced to see themselves reflected in your struggle. Every misstep, every moment, they stayed silent. Every time they failed to support or understand you, became undeniable. They couldn't hide behind excuses anymore. Your suffering made them face their own choices, their own selfishness, and the impact of their inaction. This confrontation is rarely comfortable. Most people avoid mirrors that reveal flaws because self-awareness can be terrifying. But your breakdown didn't leave room for avoidance. It exposed the ways they had depended on you without acknowledgement, leaned on you without care, and sometimes even manipulated your presence to their advantage. Suddenly they weren't just witnessing your struggle, they were confronting their part in it. And for those who had underestimated or dismissed your strength, this realization is brutal. Your suffering also made clear what they had taken for granted. The quiet sacrifices, the emotional labor, the resilience they assumed would always be there. All of it became painfully visible in your absence. They had benefited from your strength, your patience, your ability to endure. And now they had to face what it meant to have none of that to rely on. The uncomfortable truth was staring them in the face. Life without you wasn't as manageable as they had assumed, and their role in that was undeniable. The most unsettling part for them is that this confrontation isn't something they can argue away. They can't blame circumstances or twist your suffering into something else. Your pain was a reflection, a reckoning, a force that revealed the truth they had ignored. It showed them exactly how their actions, or lack thereof, shaped your experience. And there's no going back from that. Once someone has been forced to face their role in another person's suffering, the memory lingers, the awareness doesn't fade, and their comfort in assuming control over you disappears forever. Number 5, they expected you to return needing them. For a long time, certain people assumed your struggles would shape you into someone dependent, pliable, and easy to manage. They believed that after everything you endured, you would come back broken, searching for comfort and guidance from the very people who had watched you crumble. They thought your weakness would be their advantage, their power over you, their ticket to control. What they didn't anticipate, and what terrifies them now, is that you didn't return diminished. You returned whole in ways they couldn't foresee. Their expectation was simple: you would need them. They counted on your pain to keep you submissive, to ensure that any growth you made would still orbit around them. They imagined a scenario where your presence was still shaped by their convenience, your decisions still tethered to their approval. But life had other plans. The experiences that tore you apart also built you in ways no one else could replicate. Your scars became proof of endurance, not dependence. Your insight grew sharper, your boundaries stronger, and your understanding of yourself far clearer than anything they could have imagined. Now, the people who expected to wield influence over you are faced with a reality they can't manage. You don't need them in the way they assumed. You don't come seeking validation, permission, or support. Their anticipated leverage, the part of you they thought would be broken, simply doesn't exist anymore. That shift is unsettling for them because they relied on an illusion. They thrived on the assumption that your strength could be contained and your vulnerability manipulated. Your return upends all of that. It forces them to recalibrate, to confront the uncomfortable truth that they cannot dictate your life, your emotions, or your choices. You aren't coming back to them, you're coming back to yourself, and that distinction is the hardest pill for them to swallow. The power dynamic they assumed would remain intact is shattered, leaving them confused, frustrated, and suddenly aware that the person they thought they could control is no longer theirs to shape. Number 6, your resilience broke the power imbalance. There's a certain comfort some people find in watching others struggle. It creates a quiet hierarchy, a sense of control. When you were down, that imbalance existed in plain sight. They assumed they were untouchable, that your vulnerability made them untouchable, that your struggle meant they were in charge. They relied on your pain to maintain their advantage, confident that you would stay within the boundaries they had unconsciously set. But resilience has a way of disrupting illusions, and your recovery shattered everything they depended on. They counted on weakness as a measure of predictability. They believed that someone who had been broken would remain fragile, predictable, and under their influence. But resilience doesn't work that way. Every challenge you faced, every setback you endured, every moment life tried to crush you, became a tool in your hands. Your endurance was invisible to them while it was being formed, but now it's undeniable. The power they once held over you doesn't exist anymore because you've grown in ways they didn't anticipate, ways they can't manipulate or diminish. What makes this unbearable for them is not just the loss of control, but the realization that the world no longer functions according to their assumptions. They thrived on the idea that you could be measured, contained, or defined by your struggles. Your resilience proves that they were wrong. Their comfort in superiority depended on your vulnerability, and now, with that vulnerability gone, their entire perspective is unsteady. Resilience doesn't just rebuild, it redefines. It rewires the dynamics, shifting the balance from submission to empowerment. You no longer exist in a space where others can dictate your reactions or decisions. They can no longer rely on your weakness to maintain their status. Your strength is yours alone, and the realization that it cannot be negotiated, manipulated, or borrowed leaves them disoriented and powerless in ways they never experienced before. They expected the old version of you to return, predictable and contained. Instead, what came back was untouchable, aware, and unbound. And that's a truth they weren't ready to face. Number 7, they're mourning access, not love. It's a hard truth that most people never admit. What hurts some of the people around you isn't losing you. It's losing the version of you they had access to. They thrived on your availability, your patience, your ability to absorb what they couldn't handle themselves. Your time, energy, and presence were conveniences they took for granted, assuming you would always be there, always forgiving, always accommodating. When life forced you to step back, when your struggle made you unavailable, the grief they feel isn't about genuine connection or care. It's about the comfort and control they once enjoyed. They mourned the version of you that fit into their expectations, that adjusted to their needs, that made their lives easier without asking for much in return. That version is gone, and now they're confronted with the reality that you're no longer just theirs to rely on. Their grief isn't emotional in the way love inspires. It's a kind of selfish shock, a recognition that they lost a resource they took for granted. And because it's uncomfortable to face their own dependence, they often disguise their frustration as anger, confusion, or criticism, pretending their pain is about you instead of about what they've lost access to. This realization can be disorienting for them because they thought control over you was subtle, unnoticeable, and permanent. They didn't anticipate that your absence would reveal how much they relied on a version of you they didn't deserve. They didn't expect that you would return stronger, clearer, and unwilling to conform to the expectations they once had. Your growth and boundaries highlight their own reliance, and that's the part that stings hardest. The truth is stark. They aren't sad because you changed or because they truly missed you. They're unsettled because the access they once had is gone, and there's no way to get it back. They realize that the ease they enjoyed at your expense has ended, and that discomfort is a form of mourning all on its own. It's not love they're grieving. It's the absence of control, convenience, and the version of you they used to know. Number 8. Your growth exposes their stagnation. One of the hardest things for people to accept is watching someone they once underestimated move forward while they remain stuck in the same patterns. When you were struggling, they might have felt secure in their position, secure in the idea that you were contained, limited, and predictable. Your challenges made them feel superior, gave them a quiet confidence, and allowed them to ignore the parts of themselves they weren't willing to fix. But growth is relentless, and yours didn't wait for their permission or comfort. As you began to rise, change, and evolve, every step forward became a reflection of what they hadn't done. Your progress is a mirror they can't look away from, and mirrors are cruel when they show what we've refused to confront. While they stayed in familiar patterns, clinging to excuses, your evolution highlighted their stagnation in stark, undeniable ways. Every new boundary you set, every lesson you learned, every small victory you achieved was a reminder that they had remained static while you had transformed under pressure. This exposure is uncomfortable because it shatters the illusions they built around themselves. They relied on your struggle to feel normal, to feel competent, and to avoid facing their own weaknesses. But your growth removed that safety net. It forced them to acknowledge that while they were comfortable coasting, you were actively reshaping your life, your mindset, and your sense of self. That kind of self-improvement cannot be ignored, diminished, or controlled, and that's what makes it so unsettling for them. What makes it worse is that growth is inherently visible. It doesn't hide in private victories. It shows in confidence, clarity, and the way you handle life differently. For those who depended on your limitations, your transformation feels like a personal challenge, a reminder that their inaction has consequences beyond themselves. Your rise doesn't just highlight your strength, it exposes their stagnation, their excuses, and the uncomfortable truth that time moved for you while they remained behind. And there's no apology, no explanation, and no way to hide from that reality. Number 9, they can't handle the accountability your return brings. When someone comes back stronger after being broken, it isn't just about their own growth. It's about the impact that growth has on everyone around them. People who assumed your struggle would keep you small suddenly realize that your presence now carries a weight of awareness they can't escape. Every action, every word, every past slight gets re-examined under a sharper lens. The comfort of ignorance is gone and they can't handle it. They counted on the version of you who wouldn't notice, who wouldn't question, who wouldn't call out what was unfair or manipulative. That version is gone, and accountability is uncomfortable. They thrived on the assumption that your pain made you pliable. They believed that their actions, their decisions, even their selfishness, would slide unnoticed because you were too caught up in surviving to respond. But returning whole changes the rules. Your eyes see more clearly. Your boundaries are firmer. Your voice is louder. Every oversight, every exploitation, every moment where they took your presence for granted is now illuminated by the reality that you're no longer willing to carry their weight silently. Accountability isn't just inconvenient for them. It's threatening. It forces them to face what they've done, what they've ignored, and what they've assumed would go unchallenged. They realize, often too late, that the safety net they relied on, the person who would forgive, adapt, and overlook, has been removed. Their comfortable position of power, manipulation, or indifference no longer exists because you are no longer confined to their expectations. What makes it unbearable is that your accountability isn't just about blame, it's about clarity. You see patterns, motives, and intentions that were invisible when you were struggling. You respond with precision, not emotion, and that clarity disrupts the illusions they once depended on. Your return doesn't just challenge them. It unsettles them, strips away excuses, and exposes the truth they've avoided facing. They aren't angry because of you. They're unsettled because they now have no place to hide, no story to justify their past, and no way to escape the consequences of your awareness. Number 10, they underestimated the intelligence forged in your pain. Pain doesn't just break people, it teaches them, sharpens them, and forces them to see the world in ways that comfort never could. While others watched you struggle, they assumed that hardship dulled your mind, that grief and pressure left you weak, confused, and easy to manipulate. They thought suffering would make you smaller, more predictable, and less aware of the realities around you. What they failed to realize is that every tear, every sleepless night, every confrontation with life's harsh truths was quietly building a clarity they could never anticipate. Intelligence forged in pain isn't loud or showy. It doesn't seek validation or approval. It emerges as quiet precision, as the ability to read situations, motives, and intentions with an almost uncomfortable accuracy. It's the kind of awareness that makes manipulation ineffective, that makes lies obvious, and that forces people to account for actions they once assumed would go unnoticed. Those who underestimated you counted on your vulnerability to mask their own flaws, believing that struggle meant blindness. But struggle honed your perception, and your return proves that assumption dead wrong. What makes this terrifying for them isn't just that you've grown smarter or sharper. It's that your intelligence is intuitive and unrelenting. You don't need proof or confrontation to understand patterns. You see them. You don't need permission to set boundaries. You enforce them. And you don't need their consent to reclaim your power. Every move they make is now measured against someone who has endured more than they ever imagined, someone who has absorbed lessons life didn't teach gently, and someone who won't be fooled again. They are unsettled because they counted on ignorance as leverage. They relied on your perceived fragility to maintain control, influence, and comfort. That illusion is gone. Your pain has transformed into an intelligence that exposes motives, unravels pretenses, and shifts power quietly but completely. They assumed struggle would diminish you, but instead, it forged a version of you that sees clearly, moves deliberately, and refuses to be underestimated ever again. And that is a truth they are only beginning to reckon with. Number 11, your absence forced them to feel what you absorbed. When you were carrying the weight of the world, most people around you didn't notice. Or if they did, they were glad someone else was handling it. You took on emotions, responsibilities, and burdens that weren't yours to carry, smoothing over chaos that could have easily spilled into their lives. Your strength gave them comfort, stability, and convenience, and they rarely stopped to think about the cost. But when you were gone, when life forced you out of reach, the quiet truth they had ignored hit them hard. The weight you carried didn't disappear when you weren't there. It landed squarely on them, and they couldn't handle it. Your absence revealed the depth of what they had been shielded from. Every challenge, every problem, every emotional responsibility that once bounced off your resilience now landed where it couldn't be ignored. Suddenly they were confronted with realities they had taken for granted, issues they assumed would resolve themselves, and truths they had ignored because you were absorbing them all. The convenience of your strength, the invisible labor you performed, and the patience you extended without complaint had masked the full scope of life's difficulty. And now, in your absence, it became painfully clear. This is why your return feels like a disruption to them. They had become accustomed to the rhythm of life with you handling the unseen burdens. Your absence forced them to confront the effort, the strategy, and the endurance required just to survive in your stead. It wasn't just a lesson in loss. It was a revelation of how much they had depended on someone who was quietly extraordinary. They are unsettled because they've been exposed to the reality of your contributions, the sacrifices they didn't notice, and the depth of responsibility you carried without recognition. Your absence didn't just leave a void, it demanded that they feel the weight you once bore alone. And now, facing the truth of what you absorbed, they can't ignore the fact that you were never ordinary, and their comfort came at your expense. The awareness of that reality is uncomfortable, unavoidable, and entirely theirs to reckon with. Number 12. They're afraid you see them clearly now. There's a terrifying power in being truly seen, and for some people, that fear doesn't hit until it's too late. While you were struggling, many assumed that your focus was inward, that your pain made you vulnerable, distracted, or weak. They believed that their actions, their motives, and even their manipulations were invisible to you. They counted on your struggle to cloud your perception, to soften your judgment, and to keep the truth hidden under layers of survival. But now you're back, sharper, wiser, and more attuned than ever, and the blindfold they relied on is gone. What makes them uneasy isn't that you know everything. It's that you see the reality of them without distortion. You no longer interpret their behavior through the lens of hope, trust, or expectation. You observe it as it is, their intentions, their patterns, and the impact of their choices. That clarity is frightening because it removes all pretense, all excuses, and all the protective illusions they built around themselves. They can no longer hide behind confusion or claim ignorance. Your vision doesn't lie, and for the first time they are fully exposed. The fear comes from a place of accountability. They once relied on your inability or unwillingness to notice, to maintain comfort and control. Now, with your awareness restored, every word, every action, every subtle attempt to manipulate or dominate is at risk of being recognized, understood, and addressed. They feel exposed in ways they never anticipated, realizing that they are no longer operating in a space where they can assume secrecy or invisibility. Being seen clearly by someone who has endured as much as you have is not just uncomfortable, it's destabilizing. Your return is a quiet yet undeniable force that demands honesty and self-reflection from those who counted on your blindness. They are afraid because your awareness doesn't just illuminate the past, it changes the present and forces them to confront the parts of themselves they hoped you wouldn't notice. They aren't just uncomfortable, they're unsettled, because the person they once took for granted now sees them in ways they cannot escape. Number 13, your comeback removes their excuses. When you were down, they had a comfortable narrative. They told themselves that your struggles justified their actions, that your pain excused their neglect, and that life's hardships allowed them to avoid responsibility for the role they played. Every failure, every oversight, every selfish choice could be explained away by your weakness or by circumstances beyond anyone's control. It was easy for them because you weren't in a position to challenge it, to respond, or to prove them wrong. But your comeback dismantles all of that. Returning stronger, more aware, and unwilling to tolerate manipulation removes the safety net of excuses they had built. Suddenly their justifications crumble. There is no more, oh, they were too fragile to notice, or they couldn't see the truth because they were struggling. Your presence now demands clarity, honesty, and accountability. Their past behavior, their indifference, their attempts to control or take advantage, all stand in stark contrast to the strength and awareness you now carry. There's no way for them to rewrite the story or soften the impact. The evidence is you. What makes this difficult for them is that excuses were more than convenience. They were comfort. They relied on a version of reality where your absence, pain, or silence protected them from facing the truth about themselves. Your growth removes that protection. Every manipulation, every misjudgment, every instance of underestimating you becomes visible in light of your return. They can no longer hide behind assumptions, distortions, or convenient forgetfulness. Your comeback isn't just about you reclaiming power, it's about exposing the gap between who they assumed you were and who you truly are. It's about making it impossible for them to continue living comfortably with their past choices. You're not returning to beg for understanding or validation. You're returning with clarity, boundaries, and an undeniable presence that forces them to face what they've done. Your rise doesn't just challenge their assumptions, it obliterates their excuses, leaving them to confront the consequences of underestimating, misjudging, and depending on someone they thought could be contained. And that is a reality they weren't prepared for. Number 14. Life tearing you down was the last place they felt superior. For a long time, some people around you found comfort in your struggles. Your pain, your exhaustion, your moments of doubt became their quiet assurance that they were somehow ahead, stronger, or better positioned in life. They thrived on the idea that while you were crumbling under pressure, they were steady, capable, untouchable. It gave them a sense of superiority they clung to, a reassurance that they could navigate life while you were stumbling. But that perception was fragile, built entirely on your hardship, rather than their own growth or effort. The moment you began to rise, to reclaim your strength, that sense of superiority shattered. They realized that their comfort had relied not on their own abilities, but on your limitations. Life had been tearing you down, and while they thought it proved their own edge, it only highlighted how little they had achieved independently. Your struggles were never a competition. Yet they treated them as such, measuring themselves against your lowest points. And now, as you return, resilient, clear-minded, and empowered, the false pedestal they built for themselves collapses beneath them. What's most unsettling for them is that they have no way to regain that sense of control. Your rise isn't about proving them wrong or seeking revenge. It's about existing fully in the strength and awareness you earned through the battles they underestimated. Their superiority, which they quietly savored while you were down, is meaningless now. You carry your experiences as armor, and they have no leverage, no advantage, and no way to recreate the imbalance they once relied on. This is why they feel unsettled, uneasy, and even frustrated. Life tearing you down was the last place they could feel superior, the one arena where they could compare themselves to you and feel ahead. That arena no longer exists. Your strength, clarity, and boundaries make their comparisons irrelevant. Your comeback doesn't just highlight your growth, it exposes the emptiness of their reliance on your weakness, leaving them to face the uncomfortable reality that their perceived advantage was never real, and it never could have been. Conclusion. Life doesn't hand out victories on a silver platter, and the chosen ones aren't spared from the storms that break ordinary people. What makes someone extraordinary isn't that they avoid pain, but that they endure it, absorb it, and emerge on the other side stronger, wiser, and unshakably aware. Every struggle, every silent battle, and every moment that tested their limits has shaped them into a force that cannot be controlled, underestimated, or confined. Those who once found comfort in their suffering now face a truth they weren't ready for. Resilience, clarity, and growth cannot be borrowed, stolen, or ignored. From being misjudged in their lowest moments to exposing the hidden dependencies and illusions around them, the journey of the chosen one reveals uncomfortable truths for everyone watching. Pain became their teacher, absence became their power, and struggle became the foundation for a version of themselves that no one could predict. The people who assumed they would remain small, weak, or malleable are forced to confront accountability, witness transformation, and reckon with the fact that strength built in adversity cannot be replicated or manipulated. Every assumption, every expectation, and every advantage they once held has been dismantled by the unrelenting force of your comeback. This isn't just a story of survival, it's a story of reclamation, of taking back what life tried to steal, of rewriting the narrative, and of stepping into a version of yourself that commands respect, demands recognition, and refuses to be contained. When life tries to tear someone down, it often underestimates the power of what that struggle can create. A person who returns not just intact, but elevated, unstoppable, and unafraid to redefine the rules. If this resonates with you, make sure to join the conversation. Hit that subscribe button to stay inspired. Drop a comment with your thoughts and experiences, and share this video with someone who needs to witness the power of resilience. Let's celebrate strength, growth, and the unstoppable spirit together. Stay awakened, chosen ones.